Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 309, and today's date is March 8th, 2014. And the title of this episode is the Current Economic Collapse News Brief for this Saturday. And let's get right into the economic collapse news. And there was a Gallup poll taken, and the Gallup poll was about how Americans feel about terrorism. And this is about terrorism, Iranian nukes, and what is the biggest threat at this point. And Americans rank international terrorism as the greatest threat to the U.S., and they're saying along with Iran's development of nuclear weapons, majorities also perceive Islamic fundamentalism, the conflict between North and South Korea, and China's economic power as critical threats. Few Americans see Russia's military power as a critical threat to the U.S. in the coming decade. And you can see the United States corporate media and government has been building up this propaganda, and if you really look at this, most of these countries are the countries without private Western central banks. It's all the countries that they continually push and demonize because they do not control them, and when they're not controlled, they're considered the enemy, and this is what we're seeing right now. But what's interesting about this is that from just a year ago, the critical threat percentage has come down. Back in February 7th of 2013, it was at 81%. They believe that international terrorism was a critical threat. And now in February of 2014, it is only at 77%. So they are losing the war, and they're losing this propaganda spin that there is terrorism all around us, and people are starting to hopefully wake up and see that this is all manufactured to scare everyone. And we can see that as the percentage comes down, more and more people are starting to wake up, more and more people are starting to look around, and more people want to know what the actual truth is. Okay, now we understand that the United States is having a tough time keeping the troops in Afghanistan. President Karzai will not sign the bilateral security document, which will allow the United States to stay in Afghanistan and raid the people's homes at whim, and he does not want this to happen, so he's not signing it. He's saying, let's wait for the next president to come into office because he's leaving office. And right now, China is actually stepping up and saying, you don't need the United States at this point. And you have to remember, China is also in Afghanistan. They're helping them build their infrastructure. They're helping them mine copper because they have a very big copper deposit there. And China said on Saturday that it will work with Afghanistan to fight terrorism. China will work with the international community for political reconciliation in Afghanistan and support reconstruction. We will also work with Afghanistan and other neighbors to resolutely fight all terrorist forces. So we can see what's happening here. The United States is losing its grip on Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan, they need to keep Afghanistan and keep troops in there and keep the bases operating because they do grow poppies in Afghanistan. The U.S. troops do guard them. Those poppy fields are then used to create opium, and those are sold all over the world to pay for covert operations around the world. And again, the terrorism that they're talking about is mostly manufactured, and you can see that the president and Afghanistan do not want the United States in there anymore. This is why nothing has been signed. This is why they're having a tough time. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see more flare-ups of terrorist attacks in there because, again, they're not just going to leave Afghanistan alone if China is involved. It's not going to happen. Now, we understand out in the Ukraine, Crimea is going to have a referendum to join Russia, and they're moving this and pushing this forward. And what they're actually doing is creating many offices and creating their own government at this time. And what they're saying is the situation in Ukraine right now, they're saying that they do not have to be a part of Ukraine because the coup d'etat was completely set up by the United States and the EU, and again, this whole thing was completely illegal. We had a signed agreement between Ukrainian government and the opposition. They didn't hold to this agreement, and now we can do whatever we want. And they're saying that Crimea will now legally, through democratic referendum, join Russia, and it certainly complies with international law because you know the President of the United States was out there saying that this does not apply to international law. You cannot just split off and part of the country go to be on their own, and the other part of Ukraine be on their own. But we've seen this in many instances around the world. Remember Korea? There's a North and South Korea. Remember Vietnam? There's a North and South Vietnam. Remember Germany after the war? There was an East and West Germany. So you see this happen quite a bit. And again, if the people of Crimea do not want to be part of Ukraine, the western portion of Ukraine, they have every right to say, we do not want this, and this is what they are doing at this time. And right now, Crimea is forming its own armed forces. They just had a ceremony that marked the official formation of Crimea's own armed forces. Crimea has had its own armed forces for some time already, and they hope these forces will ensure peace in Crimea, especially during the coming referendum concerning Crimea's future status. Now, the President and the President of France are out there saying that they're giving another warning, and they have warned of new measures against Russia if it fails to make progress on diffusing the crisis in Ukraine. And what they're saying is, we do not want Ukraine to split apart. We need it all together. We need the entire country on the EU system. We spent a lot of money, $5 billion, to set up this entire coup, and right now, if we do not get the entire Ukraine, it is not worth our while because most of the production, most of the wealth is in the south and east. The south and east do border along the Black Sea, and they want the entire Ukraine. And you have to remember, before all this started, Russia and Ukraine were joining together, and Russia supplies all the oil and gas to the Ukraine, and Ukrainian government decided and looked at the EU, and it looked at Russia's economic policies, and they said, you know what, the EU is in trouble. They have no money. All they're doing is printing. Most of the countries are in debt. Most of the countries have 20, 30, 40% of unemployment. The youth unemployment is skyrocketing. Most of the countries are in austerity. Why in the world would we want to join the EU system? And again, Russia at this point already supplied the natural gas, the oil to Ukraine. Ukraine already was siding with Russia. The only countries that wanted this to change was the EU countries and the United States. And we have seen this happen all over the globe over and over again, where they needed to go in and remove the government, and it fits the same exact pattern, and it's not changing. And we've seen this in Yemen. We've seen this in Egypt. We've seen this in Libya, Lebanon, Iraq. We're seeing it in Africa. We're seeing it in Thailand, in Tunisia. We are seeing it in all these countries. And what's happening right now is that many of these countries, the people are fighting back. And in Libya, the people have band together. They've been fighting the government of Libya, and they are winning. Right now, the armed people of Libya, they control ports in eastern Libya, and on Saturday they started independently exporting oil, bypassing the central government in major escalation of their blockade to demand a share of the nation's petroleum wealth. The rebels, which are the people of Libya, have seized 3 major ports since August. And again, if they go ahead and they start selling this oil not using the US dollar, this is a huge problem for the central bankers. And this is why the US government decided to send down officers and help train 5,000 to 8,000 soldiers in Libya to fight the militias of Libya, and these are the people of Libya. And right now, they are completely losing the battle. And again, here we are, where they are bypassing the U.S. dollar. And Tripoli has responded. The shadow of a government, of a puppet government, responded and said it would destroy tankers trying to buy oil that is not being sold using the U.S. dollar. So here it is, it begins. We have a conflict in Ukraine. We have a conflict in Libya right now. And right now, the Western powers worry Libya will slide into instability or even break apart as the government, and they're afraid that Libya might split into two different countries at this time. Now, we see this happening in Ukraine, we see it happening in Libya, and it all revolves around the same thing: propping up the U.S. dollar, keeping it alive, keeping all countries with the U.S. dollar so they can pay for the natural resources. And again, we're seeing this all over the place. And there is a North Korea oil tanker which was trying to load crude at an eastern port controlled by the armed people of Libya. And the Tripoli is out there saying, listen, if you sell them this oil, we will blow this tanker out of the water because we will not let this happen. And these orders most likely are coming down from the central bankers' U.S. government saying, do not let them do this, because once this starts, it will be like a domino effect across the entire country of Libya, and then it will spread to other countries. And again, I've mentioned this before, if this happens, these countries will not have to hold U.S. dollars because they will not need them to purchase oil from Libya, to purchase oil from Iraq, to purchase oil from Lebanon, to purchase oil from Yemen. They will not need it, and they will remove it from their reserves and send these dollars back to the United States. So Tripoli right now is saying that they're going to arrest the tanker's crew, and they're going to take them into custody if this goes forward. And the people of Libya has started already exporting oil, bypassing the government. They're not listening to what the government says, and they're selling this oil to other places, bypassing the U.S. dollar. And we're going to see things really escalate in this area. Now, we understand we have the incidents happening in the Ukraine. We have the incident happening in Libya. We see where they're having drone attacks in the Yemen, and this is all happening all over the place. There's more troops being sent to Africa at this point in time. Spain is ramping up. They're allowing more U.S. soldiers in there to be deployed to Africa at this time, because things are really going to start to escalate, because people are fighting back. They don't want the central government of the United States in their country. They do not want the central bankers in there, and the people are rising up and fighting back at this time. And in Ukraine, what is happening, we have Putin on one side, and I mentioned this before. We have the President of the United States on the other side, Barack Obama, and both of them most likely will not back down. And I hear a lot of propaganda out there that Putin is ready to strike, Putin's moving in. And again, if Putin, China, all these countries actually wanted to destroy the United States, it would be very simple. They wouldn't even have to fire a shot. All they would have to do is dump their U.S. dollars and dump all their treasuries. They would demolish and implode the United States with a flick of a button, and they wouldn't even have to fire a shot. Again, we have to remember, Putin de-escalated what was happening in Syria. At this time, he could have gone to war with the U.S. But if you have to remember, he was talking about peace at this time while the United States was ramping up war, bringing in ships, getting ready to strike at any minute. Didn't want to hear what Assad had to say. Didn't want to work out any terms. They crossed the red line. But Putin was out there, and I'm not sticking up for Putin. I'm not saying he's a great guy, but at that point in time, strategically, he was looking for peace. He was not looking to go to war. The same thing is happening in Ukraine. They understand the central bankers created this coup, and right now, if he really wanted to, he could have just ramped up and brought in, destroyed the opposition, and taken over Ukraine with no problems whatsoever. But what do we see right now? We see a destroyer from the U.S. moving into the territory. We see both sides ramping up with military assets, because it's going to be very difficult for either side to back down, because when one side backs down, it's not going to look good, and it's not going to look good for that person and the strength of that person if they decide to back down. And we're going to have to see how this plays out and where the actual spark is that triggers the actual war. And again, we have to remember, the central bankers need Ukraine. They need it. They need this strategic location. They need to get in there. They need to put it on NATO. They needed to put it on the EU system. Russia, at this point, already has the production area, already has the Crimea, already has the south and the east side. They don't even care about the west side. The U.S. could have it. And right now, the U.S., their motive, and the central bankers' motive, is to capture the entire country of Ukraine, because they understand that the dollar is collapsing and they want war. They want this. They need it because it will cover up the collapse. Listen, if Russia or China wanted to collapse the dollar, they could do it at any second. It wouldn't be a problem. But right now, they're not looking to do that. They could have done it without Ukraine. They could have done it at any time. They are strategically trying to remove the dollar and put the yuan in place. But again, the central bankers will not let this happen. They rather go to war, and you have to remember, war benefits the central bankers, because countries have to borrow to pay for the war. Countries have to borrow to rebuild after the war. And again, these central bankers, their ego is way, way up there. They do believe that they will be victorious. They do believe that if it does go nuclear, they have bunkers underground. They will emerge after the war, take over the entire system, and they will reset the entire system. And this is their belief. Now, we understand that the central bankers, they want war. We know something's going to happen. We know they're going to have to try to shift the American people into war. And right now the polls are very low. The American people believe we shouldn't even be in Ukraine, that we should have nothing to do with Ukraine, and just like the same thing that happened in Syria. So they're going to have to switch and change the minds of the American people and Congress. And right now we understand that they've been using the propaganda to build up the next event, and this event will allow them to say, see, we told you, we need to go to war. And right now a report came out that about on the power grid, on the energy sector, last year there was about 153 cyber attacks that actually got into the systems that could have caused havoc on the power grid. And what they're saying is, if one of these get through, as they're seeing these attacks grow, it could knock out the entire power system. And again, this is definitely a very big concern of mine, because I do believe in 2003 this was not a down wire that caused a ripple effect that shut down the entire system. This was a planned attack, not an attack, but a planned exercise to see how hard it would be and how easy it would be to bring down the grid. And all of a sudden, we've seen a dry run exercise out in California, and there have been many reports that combining these two, of a cyber attack and a physical attack on the power grid system, that it could bring down areas and put them into darkness. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.